question I will ask both of you is, why does experience appear localized? We can start maybe from the lens of quantum physics. How would you answer that?
Yeah. Maybe I'll start by a shift that happened for me listening to you, Rupert, yesterday. I've been, for years, said consciousness and matter are two sides of one coin. It shifted listening to you yesterday. Because the primary experience is consciousness. So it's not quite two sides of one coin. It's just one. So why within that experience appears to be localized? I would say, like, the richness of potential, from the point of view of physics, the richness of potential which is there in the quantum state can only come to fruition, can only appear in a specific observation process. So the quantum state never collapses, keeps containing all the possibilities within itself, but can only be accessed through an individual result. Yeah, I guess that's as close as I can get to it from the point of view of physics.
I think my point of view is identical to that, but let me try to explain it using a completely different language and a different framework. So we have to start with the understanding that awareness is our primary experience. Forgive me, I'm going to have to back up a little bit to give a bit of the background. I won't go into all the details. We have to start with the understanding that awareness or consciousness is our primary experience. I think that's obvious to everyone here. Now, when we say our primary experience, who is the I or the we whose experience is to be aware? It is obviously awareness's experience that it is aware. So when we say it is our experience that awareness is primary, what we're really saying is it is awareness's experience that the knowing of its own being is its primary experience, prior to the arising of the finite mind. In other words, prior to the arising of thought and perception. Now, if we ask awareness, because awareness is the only one that knows or is aware, what is your experience of yourself? Now, we're not asking some abstract awareness, we're asking the very awareness that each of us is. What is your experience of yourself? Not what thought thinks about you, but what is your experience of yourself? I'm caricaturing awareness now. Awareness would say, if it could speak, I am present and aware, that is obvious, and I find no limits in myself. It's like asking empty space, what is your experience of yourself? Can you find an edge to yourself or a limit to yourself? Space looks around and says, no, I can never find the end of myself. I find no divisions within myself. Prior to the arising of any objects in space, space in this is a metaphor for awareness, prior to the arising of any objects in space, space is seamless, whole, indivisible, without parts, and without borders. In other words, it is infinite and eternal. It is without limits and ever-present. So awareness's primary experience of itself is that it is present and aware and without limits, eternal and infinite. Now, something that is eternal and infinite, something that is unlimited, cannot know something that is limited. This is really the essence of it. Infinite consciousness cannot know something that is finite. Now, to some of you, that might be obvious. But let me just try and explain that in case it's not absolutely obvious. Take a sphere. It's an empty sphere, one indivisible whole. Sorry, a circle. One indivisible whole. There is nothing, and this represents infinite consciousness, no parts, no objects. Now, as soon as you place a dot in that circle, this is the appearance of something finite, not only is the dot something finite, immediately the space around it becomes finite because the dot has displaced a little part of infinity's infiniteness. Infinite consciousness cannot know something finite. The infinite can only know the infinite. So, I'm caricaturing consciousness again. What does consciousness have to do in order to manifest the potential, the infinite potential which lies within it? In other words, what does it have to do to give birth to the world? To know something limited, because all manifestation is form, and all form is limited. How could something infinite give birth to something that is finite? That it can't. There's a contradiction there. So consciousness has to make a concession. It has to make a sacrifice. Consciousness has to consent to becoming a finite subject in order to bring into apparent existence a finite object. And that is why, when we view the world, whether we're in the waking state or in the dream state, we view it from the point of view of a finite self. So this is the sacrifice that consciousness makes. Mary has to overlook the knowing of her own infinite mind and consent to take on the limitations of Jane's mind. It's only as Jane's apparently limited mind that Mary can know the outside world, the streets of New York. So what does Jane's limited mind look like? It is limited in two ways. It is limited in time, and it is limited in space. So that is why experience always seems to be located, because consciousness has to limit itself and seem to be a finite mind on the inside in order to know a finite world on the outside.
I have two parts I would like to ask. So, the very essence of the individual or the self or the dot in space is space itself, is consciousness itself. So it's
Yes.
not in any way separate from it.
But it's not even that it is not separate from it, because it is not a thing in its own right. It is simply a temporary limitation that consciousness freely assumes in order to know something that seems to be outside of itself, that is a world. In other words, to put it into the metaphor of our dream, Mary's mind, which divides itself into Mary's infinite mind, divides itself into Jane's mind on the inside, Jane's self on the inside made out of mind, and Jane's world on the outside made of matter. But at no time does Mary's mind ever become divided. So at no time is our experience ever an experience of a world made of matter by a self made out of mind. That the inside self and the outside world are simply imaginary limits that consciousness superimposes on itself in order to bring the world into apparent existence. But it never actually divides itself into 10,000 things. And this is, can I just say one other thing? It's a beautiful quote you said in the Tao Te Ching. It mirrors Ramana what's the quote about
multiplicity.
About the multiplicity? What was the quote?
Naming creates
Is the
multiplicity.
mother of the 10,000 things.
Naming is the mother of the 10,000 things. Ramana Maharshi said, the I thought is the mother of the world. The apparent collapse of infinite consciousness into the finite mind brings or births the world into existence. That's what he meant. The I thought, the apparent limitation on infinite consciousness appearing as the finite mind. But the finite mind and its outside world never actually come into existence.
Mm-hmm.
Mary's mind is never divided into a multiplicity and diversity of objects. And the Tao Te Ching expresses that exquisitely.
In the last verse of
Beautiful,
that chapter.
Beautiful,
Like
yeah.
holding these together is
Yes.
the door to all.
Yes, and that is what it is meant. And this was very nice, actually. I got a new insight right at the end of your talk, that when they say in some schools of Buddhism that mind and matter rise together, it's not that infinite consciousness is dependent on matter. That's not what it means. It means that the inside self and the outside self are co-created in infinite consciousness. And with this co-creation of the inside self and the outside world, eternity appears to itself as time, infinity appears to itself as space.
I'm reminded when you spoke about like that sacrifice, that consciousness in order to manifest a concrete world. I'm reminded of a nice metaphor in the Upanishad in which Brahma gets bored of being total oneness and perfection, and then it has to split itself into separate beings in order to play and seek and come back, hide and seek and come back to himself or herself.
And what I heard you say from quantum physics, we are understanding that there is no collapse, there is no separate self.
Right.
There is infinite ocean of potentialities that the nameless and the name exist in.
Yeah. Yes.
So
So
they coexist, the collapse and all the potentialities, they're the same thing.
Right. Yeah.
And
there's an interesting paradox and circle there, which during the break talking with Paul came up. It's like this trace or this recording of information, which is how the world appears from the separate point of view, being objective and out there, is itself within this apparent split. When we say like a pattern of firing is happening in my brain that corresponds to an experience I'm having, the brain and everything, it's a construct I make of organizing experience. But the nature of this patterning is such that this apparent split in subject-object, self-world appears, and within it the world appears as objective.
There's a beautiful line in I'm sure you know it, I think it's A Midsummer Night's Dream of Shakespeare. He said, "And as imagination bodies forth the forms of things unknown, a poet's pen turns to shape them and gives to airy nothing a local habitation, and a name.
Beautiful.
I'll say that again, because it's the Tao Te Ching, Ramana Maharshi, quantum physics, all wrapped into two beautiful lines. And as imagination bodies forth the forms of things unknown, a poet's pen turns to shape them and gives to airy nothing a local habitation and a name.
And in that lies the mystery, and that's
Yeah.
what you were saying from Tao Te Ching. That's the mystery of this. It's
The door to all mysteries.
the door to the mystery is holding the name and the nameless, which
Yes.
are the same.
Yeah.
How do you hear that, Rupert? That the name and the nameless are the same. How would you articulate that through Advaita?
Our finite experience, or the finite mind, takes place in two forms, thought and perception. Through thought, experience is given a name. Through perception, experience is given a form. What is the stuff out of which thought is made? It cannot be thought about. What is the stuff out of which all form is made? It has no form. All that is present in a thought is the unthinkable substance of consciousness. All that is present in a form is the formless reality of awareness. So it's like the two people watching TV. One 15-year-old says, I'm seeing a colourful movie. The other 15-year-old is having the same experience, but says, I see a transparent screen. It's not that there is a colourful movie and a transparent screen. Experience is always one. Nobody has ever had two experiences at the same time. So matter is a way of seeing, not something that is seen. It is a way of seeing reality through the prism of the finite mind. What Jane is looking at on the streets of New York is a segment of the infinite potential that is Mary's indivisible mind. In other words, Jane is looking at Mary's mind. That means that we now, each of us now in this room, is looking at God's mind. That's what we are experiencing now. An image of God's mind. The world is what God's mind looks. When I say God, I mean Brahman, infinite consciousness. The world is what God's mind looks like from the perspective of a finite subject.
It's interesting, like, the words you've used are almost literally the word that Lao Tzu uses about the Tao, about the formless, and about, he says, like, you cannot catch its behind, you cannot be in front of it.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
it's everywhere. You cannot be outside it.
Yes. It's so impossible to speak about, because when you say, I know you understand, when you say it's everywhere, it suggests, because of the limitations of language, that there are everywheres, that there are places that are pervaded by the Tao. It suggests that there is something called an image that is pervaded by the screen. No, there are no wheres. There are no times or places that are pervaded by the doubt. There is just this infinite, unnameable, indivisible, intimate substance that never ceases to be itself and yet appears to itself as 10,000 things. Language has to say it's both. But for it to be both, there have to be two things there. It's not even both, it's prior to both. We fall silent if we really want to speak of it. So we do our best. We learn from Shakespeare and Shelley and Tennyson.
I'm reminded. I'm reminded of something else. It's like what physicists are struggling with at the moment, which is like one of the main problems, is like unifying the understanding of gravity and quantum physics, seems to imply that space and time are not ultimate reality. And it's like we don't know what their ultimate reality is, but they arise out of what we call fields, which is the ultimate nature of what is. And it's not that there are actually locations in space and moments in time.
Yes.
We're still like struggling with it. I think particularly time is the least understood thing.
Can I
yeah, please
suggest something here? That when the finite self, Jane on the streets of New York, looks at her experience, from her point of view, it appears as a multiplicity and diversity of events in time and objects in space. So, for instance, events in time, she notices that she has a series of thoughts, thought number 1, 2, 3, and 4. And when she looks at the stuff in between each of those thoughts, she sees time. And she thinks time is really there. It is the substance between thoughts. What she doesn't realize is that the time she sees or knows is not out there. It is a reflection of the way she sees. It is a reflection of her finite point of view. But her finite point of view is one way Mary's mind views a segment of itself. In other words, time is what eternity looks like from the point of view of the finite self. Time is what Mary's experience of its eternal nature is when she views it through the prism of Jane's mind. In other words, time is consciousness refracted through thought. And space is consciousness refracted through perception. In both cases, the reality of time and space is infinite consciousness, but eternal infinite consciousness. But eternal infinite consciousness appears to itself as time and space when refracted through the prism of the finite mind.
How would that translate in quantum physics?
Good question. there's work done, which isn't quite, we don't quite understand it yet, but there's work done in which reality is described in terms of a non-temporal, non-spatial quantum state. So it's like specific observations of that quantum state appear spatially and time-wise localized. I think that resonates with what you just said.
That sounds
Yeah.
close.
Yeah.
Can I just say something to connect what both of us have just said in very different language to our experience, to make sure that we're not speaking about some abstract philosophical realm that none of us have any experience of. We don't actually, nobody here actually experiences time. Try now. Time implies a past and a future. You cannot have time without a past and a future. And our view of the present moment is that it is a fraction. No one's ever quite defined how long this fraction of a moment is, but let's say it's a fraction of a moment in between these two vast spaces of the past and future. But try now in your experience to visit the past and the future. Try and go there. Try to leave the now and visit the past or the future. Can you do that? Has anybody ever actually experienced a past or a future? I don't mean had a thought about a past or a future. We can all think about breakfast this morning. And we presume that that thought validates our belief in time. It doesn't. If we try to visit the time to which thought refers, we cannot go there. Nobody has ever experienced the past and the future. What validity is there, therefore, in the belief that there is this line of time along which the present moment is moving? I mean, how fast is the present moment moving along this line? And how long exactly does the present moment last? These are absurd questions because our experience is not of a present moment. The present moment is a New Age idea. There is no moment in time. There is the eternal now. That doesn't mean time everlasting. It means this now, the only now there is. There's no time present in it. And we can do the same experiment with here and space. I won't elaborate it. But
Actually,
reminds me of what you were talking about, the quantum eraser. If it's recorded, you will describe it better. But if it's recorded, then there is a collapse. But if it's not, then it's the infinite potentiality. Maybe I'm misunderstanding.
Let me first comment briefly what Rupert just said, because physics actually does quite a good job in undoing, in spite of the fact that physicists keep holding on to that model of time moving along a line. Physics actually teaches us a very different thing about it. Like, from the point of view of relativity, time now is a relative concept. You can slice space-time in different ways, like different observers slice space-time in different ways. So what is now for me, what is in this moment for me, it's like for another observer which is moving with respect to me, those two things will not happen at the same time. One will precede the other one. So it's like the notion that there is some absolute consistent thing like time, and the same is true about space.
Yes, yes. It's
so
even more difficult to think about it in relation to space, but it's the same principle. Yes.
Right. Yes. Sorry.
Would you like to, I don't know how I made the connection between quantum erasers. Somehow the recording is like the memory.
Yeah.
Our memory is which makes this world solid as well.
Yeah.
Does
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, no, I see a connection there. Maybe not so much, or don't see it specifically in terms of time and space, but I see it in terms of how the appearance, the appearance of an objective world arises out of this splitting, which is no splitting,
yes,
because there's nothing to be split. But this like arising of a world seeing from a perspective. This arising of perspective is connected with trace or information being somehow preserved.
Yes. Maybe you can just give us a quick definition so we all understand what quantum eraser means.
Well, the quantum eraser, in quantum physics, you can, when you measure two quantities which are incompatible, the technical term is like non-commuting. For example, in a particle, position in space and velocity are incompatible quantities.
Heisenberg uncertainty.
Yes. When you measure one, you lose all information on the other one. The more accurately you know one, the more information you lose on the other one. That's something quite new. In classical physics, there is nothing like that. The quantum eraser is a device, it's an experiment made in such a way that you perform a measurement, you distinguish, let's say, whether the particle has gone through slit A or through slit B, but then by observing an incompatible quantity with the one that has recorded that information, you destroy the information. Well, the quantum eraser shows us that when that information gets destroyed, you're back in all the possibilities is being simultaneously there. You're back in the interference pattern of all those possibilities. And you can switch back and forth. You can erase that information, or you can take away the erasing of the information, and you move from the superposition of possibilities to either or specific results.
Wow.
Do you feel that is what you've just explained is consistent with my analogy of Mary having to overlook part of her infinite possibilities in order to realize a segment of them through Jane's mind? In other words, that it is a forgetting, that Mary's mind has to forget itself or overlook itself in order to bring the world, or a segment of its infinite potential, the world, the streets of New York, into apparent existence through Jane's mind.
Yeah.
And this is what, if this is the case, it would explain what many sages have said, when Rumi, for instance, said, knowledge of the world is a kind of ignorance. That is not meant to imply that somehow life, the senses, the body, is somehow bad or wrong. It's something much more profound than that, although it's sometimes misinterpreted superficially. But it means that it's about this sacrifice, the forgetting or overlooking. Consciousness needs to ignore or overlook its own infinite nature in order to bring the world into apparent existence. It has to erase a part of its
exactly.
a part of itself in order to manifest or give birth to a part of its potential.
Yeah.
Is that it?
I think that's a very close analogy there.
Yeah.
It's like, because it doesn't say that, let's say, by erasing that information, you cause some objective, different reality to be there. It's by erasing that information, you look at the totality, which is anyway there,
Yes.
at Mary's mind, through this narrowed lens, in which
Can I suggest another image, and that is, take a camera, just a regular still camera, and point it at whatever you are seeing. Imagine you have a camera, you point it at whatever you are seeing now, and you defocus the camera, and you go on and on and on defocusing it until it is completely defocused. What will you see? Nothing. A white screen. It'll be empty. You're still looking at what you're looking at now, but you can't see it. What you're looking at now hasn't disappeared, nothing has happened to it, only it cannot be known or seen. Now, imagine that you start focusing the camera. What happens? The white screen begins to appear tinted with the faintest watercolor washes, blurs of colors, and as you focus more and more, you end up seeing what you're seeing now. In other words, a multiplicity and diversity of apparently discrete objects appears to come into existence. It hasn't come into existence. It has just been realized. It was always there, but unknowable because of the total defocusing of consciousness. When consciousness is totally defocused, it just knows its own infinite being. Consciousness has to begin to focus itself, begin to overlook itself, and it does this by narrowing the range of its perception. And this could be equated, we go through the collective unconscious, the personal unconscious, the dream state where it's all forms are beginning to become clearly distinguished until you end up with the narrowest field of experience, which is the waking state. From the point of view of the separate self, the waking state is the broadest field of experience, and all the other states, the dream states, altered states of consciousness, are distortions of the waking state. It's the other way around. The waking state, in which objects, discrete objects seem to come into existence, is the narrowest field of experience. But consciousness has to limit itself in order to bring the waking state into reality. And this defocusing, it's the process we go through when we fall asleep at night. There is this relaxation of consciousness, and as consciousness relaxes, the forms become looser and looser and looser until it goes back to the knowing of its own being. That's another version of Mary's asleep in Titignano and Jane on the streets of New York.
maybe it's
Is that another way of saying what?
Yeah, it resonates perfectly. And I was just thinking that that's maybe in order to get a taste of this, that my slides first half disappeared.
Yes.
And then they were projected on a bright screen in which they dissolved.
We're working on a film at the moment, actually, that tries to depict this in a way.
Well, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, and this is an amazing conversation. I wish we had a chance to continue, and I'm sure we will probably in the future.
I hope so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.